Long before chamomile became a bedtime ritual, it was whispered into cups by monks, midwives, and grandmothers across France. Each infusion carried not just flowers, but beliefs about sleep, illness, patience, and time itself. Tonight, we trace how a simple cup of chamomile quietly flowed through French history, changing shape, meaning, and method along the way. If you enjoy slow stories like this, meant to relax your mind and gently guide you toward rest, subscribe for more history told softly and let the kettle settle. Long before chamomile was associated with rest, softness, or the quiet end of a day, it arrived in what is now France as something far more practical. Its journey began not in kitchens or bedside cups, but in the disciplined world of Roman medicine, carried across roads, battlefields, and newly settled lands during the expansion of the Roman Empire. When Roman forces moved north into Gaul, they did not arrive empty-handed. Along with laws, language, and architecture, they brought plants, carefully chosen species believed to preserve health, prevent illness, and restore balance to bodies strained by travel, labor, and war. Chamomile was one of those plants. To the Roman mind, it was not gentle or soothing in the way we understand it today. It was functional. It belonged to the same category as fennel, mint, and rue. Herbs that acted upon the body, that warmed it, cooled it, or coaxed it back toward equilibrium. Roman medical theory, heavily influenced by Greek traditions, viewed illness as imbalance. Heat, cold, moisture, and dryness needed correction, and chamomile was valued for its perceived warming and drying qualities. It was used to calm stomach disturbances, reduce inflammation, ease muscle fatigue, and assist digestion after heavy meals. As Roman roads stretched across Gaul, military camps and settlements formed around them. Soldiers suffered from aches, wounds, fevers, and digestive complaints caused by unfamiliar water and food. Chamomile was steeped not as a comfort but as a treatment. Flowers were often boiled vigorously, sometimes alongside other herbs, producing a bitter infusion that was consumed quickly, more like a dose than a drink. There was little ceremony in this preparation. The goal was effect, not pleasure. Taste was secondary, and bitterness was often interpreted as proof of potency. In early Roman settlements, chamomile was frequently prepared by camp medics and healers. Water was brought to a rolling boil, flowers added directly, and the mixture left to simmer until the liquid darkened and released a strong scent. This infusion was strained crudely, often through cloth or simply by pouring carefully, and administered warm. Sometimes honey was added, but not for comfort. It was believed to improve the herb's action and preserve the mixture briefly. Even then, the drink was consumed with intention, not leisure. As Roman civilian life expanded in Gaul, chamomile moved from camps into households. Villas built by Roman officials and merchants often included gardens planted with familiar Mediterranean herbs. Chamomile thrived in the cooler climate, spreading easily in disturbed soil near roads and buildings. Its presence became common enough that even local Gallic populations began to recognize it, though their understanding of the plant blended Roman practices with older Celtic herbal traditions. For the Gauls, plants had spiritual associations, seasonal significance, and ties to the land. Chamomile, under Roman influence, slowly shifted from a foreign remedy to a recognizable local plant. Yet even as it spread, its role remained medicinal. Roman writers described chamomile as useful for pain, swelling, and internal discomfort. It was applied externally as poultices and internally as infusions. When drunk, it was often part of a regimen rather than a single cup. Multiple doses might be taken over several days. The act of infusion was purposeful and controlled. The water temperature, duration of boiling, and combination with other herbs mattered greatly. Too weak, and it was useless. Too strong, and it could upset the stomach or cause headaches. There was also a gendered aspect to chamomile use in Roman Gaul. Women were often given chamomile infusions for menstrual discomfort, postpartum recovery, and digestive complaints. Midwives employed stronger preparations than what would later be considered acceptable for daily drinking. These infusions were sometimes combined with wine or vinegar, creating mixtures that bore little resemblance to modern herbal tea. Comfort was incidental. Relief was the goal. In Roman households, drinking chamomile was not associated with evening or sleep. It might be taken in the morning to settle the stomach or after meals to aid digestion. Nighttime remedies existed, but chamomile was not yet among the primary sleep-related herbs. That association would come much later. In this early phase, chamomile belonged to daylight hours, to activity and recovery, not rest. The method of infusion reflected this worldview. Water was heated aggressively over fire. Flowers were rarely measured precisely. Handfuls were added based on experience rather than delicacy. The resulting liquid was cloudy, aromatic, and often unpleasant by modern standards. Cups were small, sometimes no more than a few mouthfuls. The idea of sipping slowly did not yet exist in relation to chamomile. One drank, grimaced, and moved on. As Roman culture settled deeper into Gaul, medical knowledge became less centralized. Not every household had access to trained physicians, but herbal knowledge persisted. Chamomile began to appear in local markets, dried in bundles, sold alongside garlic and onions. Local healers adopted Roman infusion methods but adapted them to available resources. Some boiled chamomile in clay pots, others steeped it in warmed wine. Over time, the preparation softened slightly, though it remained medicinal in intent. Importantly, chamomile was not consumed alone as a ritual. It was part of a larger system of care that included baths, massages, and dietary regulation. Romans believed health required routine maintenance. Chamomile fit into this philosophy as a corrective substance, something to be used when the body showed signs of strain. Its use was episodic, not habitual. As Roman political control weakened in Gaul, written medical knowledge became rarer, but practical herbal wisdom survived. Chamomile remained known, but its meaning began to shift. Without centralized Roman medical authority, people relied more on observation and experience. They noticed that chamomile eased discomfort without harsh side effects. They noticed that children tolerated it better than stronger remedies. Slowly, subtly, its reputation began to change. Yet during the Roman period itself, chamomile was never romanticized. It was not associated with calm evenings or gentle rest. It was not brewed to signal the end of labor or the beginning of sleep. It was a tool used with intent and urgency. Its infusion methods reflected a world that valued efficiency over pleasure, correction over comfort. This early chapter matters because it explains why chamomile's later transformation was so profound. The plant that would one day symbolize tranquility entered France through discipline, structure, and necessity. Its bitterness was accepted, even expected. Its warmth was medicinal, not emotional. The Roman method of infusion was direct, forceful, and unsentimental, shaped by a culture that viewed the body as something to be managed and maintained. Over generations, as Roman influence faded and medieval traditions took root, chamomile would be reinterpreted. Its preparation would become gentler. Its bitterness would soften. Its meaning would drift from remedy to reassurance. But none of that could have happened without this beginning, without Roman roads, Roman kitchens, and Roman cups where chamomile first steeped not to soothe the mind, but to steady the body in an unfamiliar land. In the quiet steam rising from those early infusions, we can already sense the future waiting. A plant that once served soldiers and settlers would eventually find its place beside beds and hearths. But in Roman Gaul, chamomile was not yet a comfort. It was simply necessary. As the Roman world receded and the early medieval centuries settled over France, knowledge did not vanish, it withdrew behind stone walls. In monasteries scattered across forests, hills, and river valleys, monks became the quiet custodians of learning, memory, and method. It was within these enclosed spaces that chamomile began one of its most important transformations. No longer handled by soldiers or household healers alone, it entered a world governed by discipline, silence, and ritual, where even the preparation of an infusion could become an act of devotion. Monastic life followed strict rhythms shaped by prayer, labor, and contemplation. Under the guidance of the Benedictine order, daily routines were carefully regulated, including eating, sleeping, working, and healing. Illness was seen not only as a physical disruption, but as a spiritual trial. Herbs, therefore, were not merely remedies, they were gifts of creation to be handled with care, humility, and gratitude. Chamomile found a natural home in this worldview. Monasteries maintained enclosed gardens known as physic gardens, spaces devoted to medicinal plants. Chamomile grew easily in these plots, its small daisy-like flowers thriving in well-tended soil. Monks observed the plant closely when it bloomed, how it responded to weather, how its scent intensified when dried. These observations were recorded in manuscripts and passed orally from one generation to the next. Over time, chamomile developed a reputation within monastic medicine as a gentle but reliable herb, especially suited for those weakened by fasting, age, or long hours of prayer. The method of infusion changed significantly in this setting. Unlike the Roman habit of boiling herbs aggressively, monks favored control and moderation. Water was heated slowly, often over low flames in kitchens that also served the infirmary. The temperature mattered. Boiling was believed to damage the subtle properties of certain plants, chamomile among them. Instead, water was brought just to the edge of boiling, when steam rose but bubbles did not yet break the surface. This attention to heat reflected a belief that balance, not force, was the key to healing. Steeping time, too, became deliberate. Chamomile flowers were measured not by handfuls, but by experience refined through repetition. Too short a steep, and the infusion lacked strength. Too long, and it became bitter, unsettling the stomach rather than calming it. Many monasteries settled on a middle path, allowing the flowers to steep quietly for several minutes, often covered to preserve warmth and aroma. During this time, the monk preparing the infusion might recite psalms or prayers, integrating the act into the spiritual rhythm of the day. Prayerful preparation was not symbolic alone. Monks believed intention mattered. Healing was not solely a physical process, it required alignment of body, mind, and soul. Preparing chamomile while distracted or hurried was considered improper. Silence was encouraged. Movements were slow and deliberate. Even pouring the water was done carefully, as though acknowledging the fragility of both the patient and the plant. Chamomile infusions were commonly used in monastic infirmaries. Monks suffering from digestive discomfort, headaches, mild fevers, or restlessness were given the drink in simple cups, often ceramic or wood. Unlike Roman doses, these cups were larger, meant to be sipped slowly. The act of drinking itself became part of the remedy. Sipping encouraged stillness. Warmth spread gradually. The bitterness, softened by careful preparation, was tolerable, sometimes even pleasant. In this environment, chamomile began to acquire associations with calm and patience. Monks noticed that those who drank it in the evening seemed more settled afterward. It did not induce sleep directly, but it eased the body into rest. This observation was subtle and slow, unfolding over generations. No single monk declared chamomile a sleep aid. Instead, its reputation grew quietly, shaped by countless evenings in dimly lit infirmaries where the day's labor gave way to silence. Manuscripts from medieval monasteries often included chamomile in sections devoted to moderation and gentleness. It was recommended for those who should avoid stronger herbs. Elderly monks, novices unused to fasting, and those weakened by illness were frequent recipients. Its preparation reflected this gentleness. The water was pure, often drawn from monastery wells or nearby springs. The flowers were dried carefully, stored away from dampness, and used within the year to preserve their qualities. There was also an ethical dimension to monastic infusion practices. Waste was discouraged. Flowers were harvested thoughtfully, leaving enough to reseed. Used flowers were sometimes repurposed for compresses or added to bathwater for aching joints. Nothing was rushed, nothing discarded carelessly. This respect extended to the infusion itself. Chamomile was not prepared unless needed. Each cup had purpose. Time in monasteries moved differently. Without the urgency of military life or household labor, monks could afford patience. This patience shaped their infusion methods profoundly. Allowing chamomile to steep gently mirrored the spiritual practice of waiting, listening, and submitting to a rhythm larger than oneself. In this way, the preparation of an herbal drink echoed the broader monastic pursuit of inner stillness. The influence of these practices extended beyond monastery walls. Laypeople sought help from monks during illness, and herbal remedies were sometimes shared with nearby villages. While exact methods were not always replicated, the general approach, gentler heat, longer steeping, calmer consumption, began to filter into broader medieval culture. Chamomile's identity slowly shifted from corrective medicine to supportive comfort. By the late medieval period, chamomile prepared in the monastic style was no longer harsh or urgent. It was warm, aromatic, and quietly reassuring. The infusion itself became a pause in the day, a moment of care rather than intervention. This was a profound change from its Roman origins, and it happened not through innovation, but through restraint. In monasteries, chamomile was never just a plant. It was part of a philosophy that valued balance, humility, and attention. The monks did not seek to dominate the body, but to guide it gently back toward harmony. Their controlled steeping times, careful water temperatures, and prayerful preparation were expressions of that philosophy, repeated day after day in silence. Long before chamomile would be served in porcelain cups or associated with bedtime rituals, it was shaped by hands that believed healing required patience and reverence. Within stone walls and quiet gardens, the infusion became softer, slower, and more humane. And in that transformation, chamomile took a decisive step toward becoming what it would one day represent across France, not merely a remedy, but a companion to rest. As monastic knowledge spread beyond cloistered walls and into the wider fabric of medieval society, it began to take on a written form that would shape how people understood plants for centuries. Across medieval France, handwritten herbal manuals, carefully copied, annotated, and preserved, became quiet bridges between observation and tradition. These books were not standardized texts but living documents. Each reflected the beliefs, environment, and needs of the community that produced it. Within their pages, chamomile appeared again and again, its description evolving as its audience expanded beyond monks to women, children, and the elderly. In medieval France, literacy was rare, and books were precious. Herbal manuals were often written on parchment, illustrated with simple drawings meant more to aid recognition than to impress. Chamomile was usually easy to identify. Small white petals, yellow center, low growing habit. Its familiarity made it a staple entry. Yet what stands out in these manuals is not merely that chamomile was included, but how carefully its use was differentiated depending on the person receiving it. Unlike earlier Roman medical texts, which tended to treat the body as a universal system, medieval herbals increasingly acknowledged difference. Age, sex, and physical strength mattered. The body of a child was not the body of an adult. The body of an elderly person was considered colder, drier, and more fragile. Women's bodies were understood through the lens of reproduction, blood, and cycles. Chamomile, because of its relative gentleness, became one of the herbs most frequently adjusted to fit these distinctions. In many herbals, chamomile was first described in general terms. It was said to warm the body moderately, to ease internal discomfort, and to soften pain without violence. But immediately after this description came variations. For strong men, the infusion could be prepared with a greater quantity of flowers and allowed to steep longer. For women, especially during menstruation or after childbirth, the manuals often advised a lighter infusion, sometimes combined with honey or milk to soften its effect. For children, chamomile was frequently recommended as one of the few acceptable internal remedies, but only in very weak preparations. The language used in these manuals is revealing. Chamomile was rarely described as powerful or forceful. Instead, words associated with kindness, moderation, and patience appeared repeatedly. This tone mattered. Medieval healers were deeply cautious about harming the vulnerable. A remedy that calmed without overwhelming was valued immensely, and chamomile fit this role well. For children, chamomile was often prescribed for digestive upset, restlessness, or mild fevers. Herbal manuals warned against boiling it too long when intended for the young. Water should be heated gently, flowers added briefly, and the infusion strained carefully. Sometimes it was advised to dilute the drink further with warm water. The goal was reassurance as much as treatment. A calm child was believed to recover more easily, and chamomile's aroma alone was thought to help. Women's prescriptions were more complex. Herbal manuals in medieval France frequently divided guidance for women into stages of life: maidenhood, childbearing years, and old age. Chamomile appeared in all three, but in different forms. For young women, it was sometimes suggested to ease cramps or internal tension, but always with caution. Excessive use was discouraged, reflecting beliefs about its warming qualities. For women after childbirth, chamomile infusions were recommended more freely, believed to help the body settle and recover. In some texts, the infusion was paired with baths or compresses, showing that chamomile was not confined to drinking alone. Elderly people occupied a special place in medieval herbals. Their bodies were thought to lack heat and moisture, making them susceptible to stiffness, melancholy, and digestive weakness. Chamomile was often recommended here, but again, preparation mattered. Too strong an infusion might upset a weakened stomach. Too weak, and it would do nothing. Manuals advised careful observation, encouraging healers to adjust steeping time based on how the person responded. This individualized approach marked a significant development in medieval medicine. What is striking is how often herbal manuals emphasize attentiveness. Chamomile was not a fixed recipe. It was a relationship between plant and person. The same flowers could be prepared in multiple ways, depending on who would drink them. This flexibility reflects a growing awareness of human variation, even within a framework still governed by humoral theory. The manuals themselves were often compiled in monasteries, but they circulated widely. Some were copied for noble households, others adapted by village healers who could not read Latin but relied on oral explanation. Over time, chamomile's reputation spread beyond institutional medicine into domestic life. Women, in particular, became key transmitters of this knowledge. Mothers learned how to prepare chamomile for children. Midwives refined its use through experience. Elderly women passed on quiet instructions about timing and strength. Chamomile's frequent appearance in herbals also points to its availability. Unlike rare spices or imported resins, chamomile grew easily in fields, gardens, and along paths. Herbal manuals often noted this, describing where to find it and when to harvest it. Flowers were to be picked in dry weather, dried in shade, and stored carefully. These instructions mattered because improper storage could dull the plant's qualities. Again, we see an emphasis on care rather than force. The illustrations in these manuals, though simple, reinforced familiarity. Chamomile was not exotic, it was near at hand. This closeness encouraged experimentation and refinement. People learned by doing, by watching how different bodies responded. Over generations, this experiential knowledge accumulated quietly, shaping a tradition that valued chamomile as a companion rather than a cure-all. By placing chamomile within categories of age and gender, medieval herbals helped redefine its identity. It was no longer just a medicinal substance applied uniformly. It became adaptable, responsive, and personal. This shift laid the groundwork for its later association with comfort and routine. When something can be safely given to a child or an elderly person, it gains trust. When it appears again and again in handwritten books meant to guide care, it becomes woven into daily life. In medieval France, these herbals served as quiet teachers. They taught that healing was not only about correcting imbalance, but about listening to the body, to circumstance, to limitation. Chamomile, as presented in their pages, embodied this lesson. Its preparation changed with the person before it. Its strength was adjusted, its bitterness softened, its warmth moderated. Long before printed books standardized recipes, these handwritten manuals preserved a softer wisdom. They acknowledged vulnerability. They respected difference. And through their careful prescriptions for women, children, and the elderly, they transformed chamomile from a general remedy into a trusted presence across generations. In doing so, they helped guide it further along its slow path toward becoming one of France's most enduring symbols of gentle care. As chamomile moved out of monasteries and manuscripts and into everyday life, it began to reflect the deep social divisions of medieval France. The same small white flower appeared in both peasant cottages and noble estates, yet the way it was prepared, consumed, and understood differed dramatically. These differences were not only about taste or preference, they were shaped by access to resources, time, education, and ideas about the body itself. Through chamomile, one can quietly observe the contrast between lives lived close to necessity and lives shaped by refinement. In rural peasant households, chamomile was valued for one primary reason: it worked. Life for peasants was physically demanding, repetitive, and often harsh. Bodies were worn down by labor in fields, exposure to cold and rain, poor nutrition, and long hours of work from childhood onward. When discomfort arose, stomach pain, fever, cramps, exhaustion, there was little room for subtlety. Remedies needed to be strong, fast, and uncomplicated. Chamomile, readily available in fields and along paths, fit this need perfectly. Peasant methods of infusion were rustic and direct. Flowers were often gathered opportunistically rather than carefully timed. A woman might pluck chamomile while tending crops or walking home, bundling it loosely and hanging it to dry near the hearth. There was rarely concern for exact drying conditions. Smoke, heat, and dust were unavoidable. When chamomile was needed, dried flowers were taken down and added to a pot of water already boiling over an open fire. The water was not measured, nor was the quantity of flowers. A handful went in, sometimes more if the ailment seemed severe. The boiling itself was vigorous. In peasant homes, fuel was precious, and water was typically heated once for multiple purposes. Chamomile might be boiled alongside other herbs, roots, or scraps. The idea of precise temperature control was unrealistic. The infusion became dark, bitter, and potent. This bitterness was not seen as a flaw. In rural belief, bitterness signaled strength. A remedy that tasted unpleasant was assumed to be effective. Comfort was secondary to relief. Cups in peasant homes were simple, wooden, clay, or metal. The infusion was drunk quickly, often while standing or continuing work. There was no expectation of stillness. Chamomile was a tool, not an experience. Children might receive diluted versions, but even then, the taste was rarely softened. Honey was scarce. Sugar was non-existent. The body was expected to endure. Contrast this with aristocratic households, where chamomile took on a different character entirely. Noble estates had kitchens separate from living quarters, staffed by servants who specialized in preparation. Water quality mattered. Herbs were often purchased from markets or grown in carefully maintained gardens. Chamomile was selected deliberately, dried under controlled conditions, and stored in clean containers. Its preparation reflected a worldview that valued balance, elegance, and moderation. In noble homes, chamomile was rarely boiled aggressively. Influenced by monastic practices and later by learned physicians, aristocratic households favored gentler infusions. Water was heated until steaming, not boiling. Flowers were added carefully, often measured by spoon rather than handful. The vessel was covered to retain warmth, and the infusion was allowed to steep quietly. Time mattered here, not because it was scarce, but because it could be afforded. Taste became important. Bitterness was undesirable. Chamomile was sometimes blended with other gentle herbs or sweetened with honey. In later periods, milk was added, creating a drink closer to what we might recognize today. The goal was not merely to address a symptom, but to soothe the body and senses together. Drinking chamomile in a noble household could be a seated activity, accompanied by conversation or silence, signaling a pause in the day. These differences reflected deeper beliefs about the body. Among the aristocracy, health was tied to refinement. Excessive bitterness or harsh remedies were thought to disturb delicate constitutions. Noble bodies were imagined as more sensitive, more vulnerable to imbalance, requiring careful handling. Peasant bodies, by contrast, were seen, even by peasants themselves, as robust, hardened by labor, able to withstand stronger measures. Gender roles further shaped these practices. In rural homes, women bore the responsibility of care with limited tools. Their methods were pragmatic, shaped by necessity rather than theory. In noble households, women often oversaw remedies with guidance from physicians or texts. Their role was supervisory rather than improvisational. Knowledge flowed downward, from books and trained professionals to servants, rather than upward from lived experience. Yet it would be a mistake to assume one method was superior. Peasant boiling methods, though harsh, often extracted more of the plant's compounds. They were effective in their own way. Aristocratic infusions, while gentler, sometimes prioritized comfort over potency. Each method reflected the realities of its environment. One valued speed and strength. The other valued control and elegance. Over time, these two traditions influenced one another. As ideas traveled between countryside and court, methods softened in rural areas and simplified in noble ones. Peasants adopted gentler steeping when fuel allowed. Aristocrats acknowledged the usefulness of stronger preparations in certain cases. Chamomile became a bridge between worlds, adaptable to both. What remained constant was its presence. Whether boiled over an open hearth or steeped in porcelain, chamomile was trusted. It crossed class boundaries precisely because it could be transformed. The same flower could endure smoke and boiling or grace a refined cup. Its versatility allowed it to survive centuries of social division. In this contrast between peasant and noble methods, we see more than different recipes. We see different relationships to time, labor, and the body itself. One method reflects urgency and resilience. The other reflects patience and control. Chamomile absorbed both, quietly adjusting its role without losing its essence. By the late medieval period, these contrasting practices had laid the foundation for chamomile's future. It was no longer tied exclusively to hardship or privilege. It belonged everywhere. In cottages and chateaux alike, it offered relief, sometimes rough, sometimes gentle, but always familiar. And in that familiarity, chamomile continued its slow journey from medicine toward comfort, shaped as much by social life as by the flower itself. Long before chamomile was associated with quiet evenings or personal rituals of rest, it held a far more urgent role in the hands of French midwives. In medieval and early modern France, childbirth was one of the most dangerous thresholds a person could cross. Midwives stood at that threshold daily, armed not with surgical tools or formal medicine, but with experience, memory, and plants whose effects had been tested across generations. Among these plants, chamomile occupied a position of deep trust, valued not for delicacy but for reliability. In rural villages and crowded towns alike, midwives were often the most medically knowledgeable figures a woman would ever encounter. Their knowledge was not written in books, but carried in repetition and observation. They learned how bodies responded under strain, how pain ebbed and returned, how fear could tighten muscles and delay recovery. Chamomile was one of the few herbs they relied on consistently, because it worked gently yet persistently, and because it could be adjusted in strength depending on need. For childbirth recovery, chamomile infusions were prepared much more strongly than those used for ordinary discomfort. Midwives believed that after labor, the body was left open, weakened, and vulnerable to cold. A strong chamomile brew was thought to restore warmth, reduce internal tension, and encourage the body to settle back into itself. Flowers were often boiled rather than steeped, sometimes for extended periods, creating a dark, aromatic liquid. This was not a tea meant to be enjoyed. It was medicine, taken warm and often in silence. These infusions were given soon after birth, sometimes mixed with honey or wine if available, sometimes plain. The warmth mattered as much as the herb itself. Midwives observed that women who drank chamomile shortly after labor often experienced less abdominal discomfort and fewer chills. Over time, this observation became tradition. The strength of the infusion was carefully judged. Too weak and it was ineffective. Too strong, and it could cause nausea in an already exhausted body. Experience guided the hand. Chamomile was also used externally in midwifery. The same strong infusion given to drink might be used to soak cloths, applied to the abdomen or perineum. Warm compresses infused with chamomile were believed to ease soreness and promote healing. In some regions, chamomile was added to postpartum baths, filling the small rooms with a scent associated not with rest, but with survival and care. Sleep, too, was a concern in the days following childbirth. Pain, fear, and responsibility often kept new mothers awake even when exhausted. Midwives noticed that chamomile helped the body loosen enough for rest to arrive naturally. Unlike later associations with bedtime, this sleep was not leisurely, it was necessary. Strong chamomile infusions were given in smaller quantities at night, enough to calm the body without overwhelming it. The goal was not sedation but relief space for sleep to happen. Infants were another focus of midwifery practice, and chamomile played a quieter but equally important role here. Babies cried for many reasons: hunger, cold, discomfort, unfamiliarity with the world itself. Midwives learned to distinguish between cries of need and cries of distress. When digestive discomfort or restlessness was suspected, chamomile was sometimes used in extremely diluted form. A few drops of a weak infusion might be added to warm water or breast milk. Never given alone or in large quantities. Calming infants was not only about the child, it was about preserving the strength of the mother. A crying baby meant lost sleep, delayed healing, and increased risk. Chamomile, when used carefully, helped break cycles of unrest. Midwives emphasized caution. Herbal manuals and oral teachings alike warned that infants were easily overwhelmed. What soothed an adult could harm a child. This is why chamomile was so valued. It could be softened to near gentleness without losing its effect. The preparation for infants differed markedly from that for postpartum women. Flowers were steeped briefly, not boiled. Water was warm, never hot. The infusion was strained thoroughly, ensuring no plant matter remained. Even the scent was considered. Some midwives believed that simply placing chamomile near a cradle had a calming effect. Whether or not this was true, the association between chamomile and infant calmness grew stronger with time. Midwives also understood the emotional weight of childbirth. Fear, especially in first-time mothers, could linger long after labor ended. Chamomile became part of reassurance. Its smell, warmth, and familiarity signaled care. Women who had watched their own mothers drink chamomile after birth recognized the ritual. In this way, chamomile carried memory as well as medicine. Because midwives worked outside formal institutions, their practices varied by region. In some parts of what is now France, chamomile was combined with other herbs. In others, it was used alone. Some midwives favored boiling, others preferred long steeping. What united these practices was adaptability. Chamomile could be shaped to the moment, strong for recovery, gentle for infants, moderate for rest. This adaptability also protected midwives themselves. Herbal knowledge, especially related to reproduction, was often viewed with suspicion by religious or medical authorities. Chamomile, already widely accepted and respected, was a safe choice. Its use could be defended as traditional, moderate, and non-threatening. In this sense, chamomile helped preserve midwifery knowledge during periods when other practices were suppressed. Over generations, chamomile's association with childbirth and early life deepened. It became part of the unseen structure supporting families, rarely recorded, rarely celebrated, but constantly present. Long before it was served in teacups as a symbol of tranquility, it was brewed in pots beside beds, where life had just arrived and bodies struggled to recover. This history explains why chamomile carries such deep connotations of safety and care. Its gentleness was earned through careful, sometimes intense use. Midwives trusted it not because it was mild, but because it could be strong without being cruel. It calmed without silencing, warmed without burning, supported without overtaking the body's own work. In the hands of French midwives, chamomile was not an accessory to rest, it was a partner in survival. Its infusions marked transitions from pain to recovery, from wakefulness to sleep, from crying to calm. And though those midwives left few written records, their practices shaped how chamomile would be understood for centuries afterward, quietly guiding it toward the role it would one day hold in countless homes, as a symbol of gentle care rooted in profound necessity. As medieval severity slowly gave way to the curiosity and sensual awareness of the Renaissance, chamomile entered a new chapter in France, one shaped not by urgency or survival, but by pleasure, perception, and refinement. This shift did not happen suddenly. It unfolded gradually, alongside broader changes in how people ate, drank, smelled, and understood the body. During the Renaissance, French culture began to see taste and aroma not as distractions from health, but as essential components of it. Chamomile, long respected for its medicinal value, was gently reshaped by this new sensibility. In earlier centuries, the effectiveness of an infusion mattered far more than how it tasted. Bitterness was tolerated, even welcomed. But Renaissance thinkers, influenced by classical texts rediscovered and reinterpreted, began to argue that harmony mattered in all things, including remedies. A drink that pleased the senses was believed to work more smoothly on the body. Harshness, whether in flavor or effect, was increasingly viewed as disruptive. This philosophy slowly transformed how chamomile was prepared. French households of means began to adopt gentler methods of infusion. Instead of boiling flowers aggressively, water was heated more carefully. It was no longer brought to a rolling boil by default. Instead, it was warmed until steam rose softly, a sign that it was ready without being destructive. Chamomile flowers were added with intention, often fewer than before, and the vessel was covered to preserve the delicate aromatic oils. This method produced a lighter colored infusion, clearer in appearance and softer on the palate. Aroma became newly important. Renaissance France experienced a heightened awareness of scent in daily life, from perfumes and pomanders to scented gloves and waters. Chamomile's apple-like fragrance was now appreciated as part of its value. People noticed that when prepared gently, the scent was calming and pleasant rather than sharp. This sensory pleasure was no longer incidental, it was central. Drinking chamomile became an experience rather than a task. Taste followed closely behind. Chamomile prepared in this softer way revealed subtle sweetness beneath its bitterness. Honey was still used, but sparingly, as a complement rather than a necessity. In some circles, chamomile was blended with other mild herbs or flowers to create balanced infusions that appealed to refined palates. The idea that a medicinal drink could also be enjoyable marked a profound cultural change. This shift reflected broader transformations in French cuisine. Renaissance kitchens emphasized balance, layering, and restraint. Heavy medieval stews gave way to lighter preparations that highlighted individual ingredients. In this context, chamomile was no longer drowned in excess heat or combined indiscriminately. Its character was allowed to emerge. Preparation became an act of discernment. Social rituals also changed. Drinking chamomile was no longer confined to illness or recovery. It began to appear during moments of rest, conversation, or contemplation. In refined households, chamomile might be served in the evening as part of a calming routine, signaling a transition from activity to repose. Cups became finer, often ceramic or porcelain, and the act of drinking slowed. Sipping replaced swallowing. Medical thinking evolved alongside these habits. Renaissance physicians increasingly emphasized moderation and prevention. Rather than waiting for illness to strike, people were encouraged to maintain balance through diet and routine. Chamomile fit easily into this philosophy. Prepared gently, it was seen as supportive rather than corrective. Its role shifted from intervention to maintenance. This new approach also softened chamomile's reputation. It was no longer associated primarily with childbirth pain or emergency care. Instead, it became linked to calm digestion, settled nerves, and gentle evenings. The infusion method mirrored this change. Steeping replaced boiling, precision replaced excess, pleasure replaced endurance. Importantly, this transformation was shaped by cultural aspiration. The Renaissance ideal valued grace, education, and refinement. To drink something harsh and crude was increasingly seen as uncivilized. Chamomile, once a marker of necessity, was refined to suit new ideals. The same plant that had endured smoke, filled cottages and infirmaries was now welcomed into salons and studies. Yet this refinement did not erase chamomile's past. Knowledge of stronger preparations remained, reserved for moments of need. What changed was choice. People now distinguished between chamomile as medicine and chamomile as comfort. The infusion method adjusted accordingly. A short steep for relaxation, a longer one for digestive support. The plant became versatile in a new way, its gentleness now intentional rather than accidental. This era also saw increased interest in the aesthetics of preparation. The clarity of the liquid, the color, the fragrance rising from the cup, all were noticed. These sensory details reinforced the idea that healing could be pleasant. The body, it was believed, responded better when the mind was at ease. Chamomile prepared gently supported this belief perfectly. The Renaissance shift toward taste did more than improve flavor, it changed meaning. Chamomile began to symbolize balance between usefulness and enjoyment. It represented a world in which care extended beyond survival into quality of life. This idea resonated deeply within French culture, where food, drink, and ritual became expressions of identity. By the end of the Renaissance, chamomile infusion in France had largely shed its harshest forms outside of emergency use. What remained was a quieter, more graceful drink, aromatic, mild, and intentionally soothing. The method of preparation had softened, but in doing so, chamomile had gained something lasting. It had become not just something one took, but something one chose. This cultural turn laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The association between chamomile and comfort, between infusion and rest, would continue to deepen in the centuries ahead. But it was during the Renaissance, when taste and refinement entered the conversation, that chamomile truly began to feel familiar, not as a remedy imposed upon the body, but as a companion invited into daily life. As chamomile moved further away from its medicinal origins and deeper into daily life, the vessel that held it began to matter almost as much as the infusion itself. The rise of porcelain cups, refined teaware, and social salons quietly transformed not only how chamomile was served, but how it was understood. What had once been poured into rough vessels for quick consumption now lingered in delicate cups, handled with care, shared in conversation, and bound to ritual. In this transformation, chamomile became inseparable from the objects and spaces that framed its presence. This change unfolded alongside a broader shift in European material culture. Porcelain, once rare and mysterious, entered French life through trade and imitation. Its smooth surface, pale color, and fragility encouraged a different relationship with liquids. Thick, bitter brews that stained or cracked coarse vessels were ill-suited to porcelain. As these cups became more common in wealthy households, infusion methods adapted naturally. Chamomile was steeped more gently, producing a clearer, lighter liquid that complemented the vessel rather than challenged it. Teaware encouraged attentiveness. A porcelain cup demanded steadier hands and slower movement. One did not drink hastily from it while standing or working. To hold such a cup was to pause. This pause changed everything. Chamomile, now encountered in moments of stillness, began to feel less like a remedy and more like a ritual. The act of brewing adjusted accordingly. Water was heated carefully. Flowers were measured with restraint. The infusion was strained cleanly to protect the cup's surface and preserve visual clarity. Salons played a crucial role in this evolution. These gatherings, often hosted by educated women, were spaces of conversation, ideas, and refinement. What was served in salons mattered. Drinks were chosen not only for their effects, but for their symbolism. Chamomile, gentle and aromatic, fit the tone perfectly. It did not intoxicate or excite. It soothed, supported conversation, and extended the evening without excess. In this setting, chamomile was no longer private or medicinal. It was social. Serving chamomile in a salon required consistency. Guests expected a pleasant taste and uniform appearance. This pushed preparation further toward standardization. Boiling was avoided. Steeping times were moderated. The infusion became predictable, reliable, and smooth. Sweeteners were offered separately, allowing individuals to adjust without altering the base drink. This flexibility reflected salon culture itself, structured, but open to personal expression. Porcelain also introduced visual ritual. The pale liquid of chamomile against white ceramic created a sense of purity and calm. Steam rising from the cup became part of the experience. Aroma was noticed more keenly when the cup was brought close to the face. These sensory elements reinforced the idea that chamomile was meant to be savored slowly. Drinking became performative in a subtle way, signaling taste, restraint, and cultural belonging. As teaware spread beyond salons into private homes, these rituals followed. Middle-class households adopted smaller cups, saucers, and teapots. Chamomile was prepared with similar care, even when consumed alone. The objects themselves taught behavior. A teapot suggested steeping rather than boiling. A cup suggested sipping rather than swallowing. Over time, these cues reshaped habits without instruction. The rise of porcelain also encouraged separation between preparation and consumption. Chamomile was brewed in teapots, then poured. This separation allowed better control over strength and temperature. It also created a moment of anticipation, the pause between brewing and drinking. This pause became part of the ritual, allowing aromas to settle and conversation to continue. Chamomile filled the space gently, without demanding attention. Salons reinforced the idea that chamomile belonged to the evening. It was not a morning stimulant or a midday remedy. It accompanied reflection, storytelling, and the gradual winding down of thought. This temporal association influenced preparation. Infusions were lighter, designed to relax without dulling the mind. Chamomile's role shifted definitively toward calm rather than correction. Importantly, these rituals were not universal. Rural households continued older methods alongside new ones, but the cultural influence of salons and teaware was powerful. They defined aspiration. To serve chamomile in a porcelain cup was to participate in a shared ideal of refinement. Even those who could not fully adopt the practice absorbed its values: gentleness, moderation, attention. In this environment, chamomile became embedded in gesture. Offering a cup signaled care, accepting it signaled trust. The ritual required no explanation. It was understood. This unspoken language was strengthened by the consistency of objects and methods. A porcelain cup of chamomile meant the same thing across many households: pause, calm conversation, ease. The transformation also affected how chamomile was perceived internally. People began to associate its effects not only with the herb, but with the setting. Calm came from the cup, the chair, the company, the slow pace. Chamomile became a thread woven through these experiences, reinforcing them without dominating. Its preparation softened because the context demanded softness. By the time these rituals became widespread in France, chamomile had fully crossed a threshold. It was no longer shaped primarily by need but by meaning. Porcelain cups and salons did not change the plant itself, but they changed how people met it. They slowed it down, they refined it, they gave it a place in social life that medicine alone could never provide. In these quiet rituals, cups lifted, steam rising, conversation unfolding, chamomile found a lasting home. Its infusion mirrored the values of the moment: clarity over excess, aroma over bitterness, presence over urgency. And through these choices repeated night after night, chamomile became what it is now remembered as: not just a drink, but a gesture of gentle attention, shaped as much by porcelain and ritual as by the flower itself. As chamomile settled into French life, it did not become uniform. The plant was the same, but the land was not. Climate, culture, and daily rhythm shaped how people dried flowers and prepared infusions, creating quiet regional identities around a single herb. In Provence, Normandy, and Paris, chamomile carried the imprint of sun, rain, and stone streets, each place teaching the plant a different way of being handled. These variations were rarely written down, yet they endured through habit, passed from hand to hand, cup to cup. In Provence, chamomile grew under strong light and dry air. The Mediterranean climate shaped every step of its preparation. Flowers were often harvested early in the day, once the dew had lifted but before the heat became too intense. Provençal households believed that chamomile gathered in full sun carried a stronger scent and a brighter character. Drying was quick and open. Flowers were spread thinly on cloths or woven trays, left in shaded outdoor spaces where warm air could circulate freely. The goal was speed without scorching, dry enough to preserve aroma, but not so slow that moisture lingered. This method produced chamomile that was pale, fragrant, and slightly sweeter. When it came time to prepare an infusion, Provençal methods reflected the same lightness. Water was heated gently and flowers were steeped briefly. Long boiling was avoided, not only because it dulled flavor, but because in a warm climate, heavy infusions were thought to weigh the body down. Chamomile in Provence was often drunk in the late afternoon or early evening, paired with rest after heat rather than preparation for sleep. The infusion was aromatic, clear and restrained, mirroring a culture that valued ease and balance in daily life. In contrast, Normandy offered a cooler, damper environment. Chamomile here faced different challenges. Frequent rain and heavier air made drying a careful, patient process. Flowers were often brought indoors quickly, hung in bundles from beams or spread near hearths where gentle warmth and smoke assisted drying. This slower method produced chamomile with deeper color and a more earthy scent. The flowers absorbed the atmosphere of the home, wood, fire, damp wool, becoming heavier in character. Steeping techniques in Normandy reflected this density. Chamomile was often prepared more strongly, sometimes simmered briefly rather than merely steeped. In a colder climate, warmth mattered. The infusion was expected to comfort the body against chill and fatigue. Longer steeping times extracted more bitterness, which was not seen as unpleasant, but grounding. Chamomile in Normandy was associated with evenings, long nights, and recovery from labor in wet fields. It was a drink of endurance, meant to settle the body and encourage rest in a landscape shaped by wind and rain. Paris, as always, stood apart. In Paris, chamomile was less influenced by soil and weather and more by fashion, trade, and ideas. Flowers consumed in the city often came from surrounding regions, already dried and bundled by others. This distance from cultivation changed the relationship to the plant. Parisians were less concerned with how chamomile grew and more with how it appeared, tasted, and fit into social routines. Drying methods were standardized through commerce. Flowers were expected to look clean, uniform, and appealing. Discoloration or strong smoky scents were undesirable. As a result, chamomile used in Parisian households tended to be lighter, more neutral, and consistent. Preparation followed suit. Steeping was precise. Quantities were measured. The infusion needed to be predictable, suitable for guests, salons, and evening rituals. Parisian chamomile was rarely boiled. Boiling was associated with rustic life, with necessity rather than choice. Instead, water was heated carefully, flowers steeped under cover, and the liquid strained until clear. Aroma mattered, but so did appearance. The infusion should be pale, inviting, and refined. Chamomile in Paris became less about climate and more about culture, about signaling moderation, calm, and taste. These regional differences were not rigid boundaries. Travelers carried habits with them. Ideas flowed between countryside and city, yet the underlying patterns persisted. Provence favored speed and lightness, shaped by sun and air. Normandy embraced patience and strength shaped by dampness and cold. Paris refined and standardized, shaped by social life and aesthetics. What united these regions was not method but trust. Chamomile was present everywhere, adaptable enough to absorb local values without losing its essence. The same flower could be dried in open air, by hearth smoke, or through careful storage. It could be steeped briefly or drawn out slowly. Each method made sense within its environment. These variations also influenced how chamomile was understood emotionally. In Provence, it felt refreshing and balancing. In Normandy, it felt grounding and protective. In Paris, it felt calming and civilizing. None of these meanings contradicted one another. Together, they formed a complete portrait of chamomile's place in French life. By adapting to regional rhythms, chamomile avoided becoming fixed or fragile. It remained useful across classes and climates. Its preparation techniques became quiet expressions of place, reflecting how people lived, rested, and endured. In this way, chamomile did more than soothe bodies. It carried the character of the land itself. Long before modern recipes attempted to standardize infusion times and measurements, France already held many chamomiles, each shaped by its region. These differences were rarely named, but they were felt. And in the gentle steam rising from cups across Provence, Normandy, and Paris, chamomile continued its slow work, absorbing local life, one place at a time. For most of its history, chamomile was not something one chose at the end of the day. It was something one reached for when the body complained. Pain, cramps, fever, digestive trouble, childbirth recovery. These were the moments that summoned chamomile into a cup. It arrived with purpose, not preference. And yet, somewhere between necessity and habit, chamomile crossed a quiet threshold. Without proclamation or plan, it moved from remedy to ritual, from response to choice, from medicine to nightly comfort. This transformation unfolded slowly, shaped by centuries of repeated experience. People noticed patterns long before they named them. A cup given for stomach pain also brought calm. A drink meant to ease tension also softened the mind. A body that settled more easily often slept more deeply. These observations accumulated not in theory, but in evenings after work was done, after children were quiet, after the day's noise faded. In early periods, chamomile was taken when something was wrong. There was no reason to drink it otherwise. Strong preparations were brewed only as needed. But as infusion methods softened over time, chamomile became less taxing on the senses. It no longer demanded endurance. When boiling gave way to gentle steeping, bitterness receded, aroma emerged. The drink became something one could return to without discomfort. This change in preparation made repetition possible. Repetition changed meaning. A remedy taken repeatedly begins to feel familiar. Familiarity invites routine. In households where chamomile was prepared often, for children, for elders, for women recovering from labor, it became a background presence. The smell alone came to signal care and safety. Eventually, people began to associate that signal with calm rather than illness. Evenings played a decisive role. This was the one time of day shared across class, region, and occupation. Whether peasant or noble, the end of the day marked a pause. Bodies cooled, minds loosened. Chamomile, already known to ease digestion and soften tension, fit naturally into this moment. It did not stimulate like wine or coffee. It did not demand alertness. It asked nothing except stillness. At first, chamomile appeared in the evening only when discomfort lingered. A sore stomach after dinner, restlessness after labor, fatigue that clung too tightly. But over generations, people noticed that drinking chamomile even without complaint made the evening gentler. Sleep arrived without resistance. The night felt less sharp. This realization did not spread through instruction, but through imitation. Someone drank chamomile and rested better. Others followed. As chamomile entered the evening without illness, its strength adjusted again. There was no need for intensity. Infusions became lighter. A few flowers, warm water, brief steeping. The goal was no longer correction but transition, from wakefulness to rest. This transition mattered deeply in societies without artificial lighting or rigid schedules. Sleep came when the body allowed it. Anything that helped ease that surrender was welcomed. Objects reinforced the shift. Cups grew smaller and finer. Teapots replaced cooking pots. These changes signaled intent. A pot suggested remedy. A cup suggested enjoyment. When chamomile moved into cups reserved for quiet moments, it inherited their meaning. Drinking it became an act of choosing calm. Language followed practice. Chamomile was no longer spoken of only in terms of effect. People described how it felt: soft, gentle, settling. These words belong to comfort, not medicine. A remedy acts upon you. Comfort meets you where you are. Chamomile crossed that line subtly, but decisively. Importantly, this shift did not erase chamomile's medicinal role. Strong infusions remained part of care. But a distinction emerged. There was chamomile for sickness and chamomile for the evening. Same plant, different intention. This distinction allowed chamomile to exist daily without diminishing its authority. It could be trusted often because it was gentle by choice. Cultural rhythm reinforced this transformation, especially in France. Meals became more structured. Evenings became social or reflective. The day ended not abruptly, but gradually. Chamomile filled the space between activity and sleep. It did not demand conversation, but allowed it. It did not command silence, but welcomed it. In this way, it adapted to both solitude and company. Over time, children grew up watching adults drink chamomile not in sickness, but in peace. This normalized the habit. What one sees nightly becomes unquestioned. Chamomile ceased to be something you were given and became something you chose. That choice is the heart of ritual. The body responded in kind. Anticipation alone began to relax muscles. Smell triggered memory. The cup itself became a signal. By the time chamomile touched the lips, the body was already preparing for rest. The drink did not cause sleep, it invited it. This is how chamomile became an evening habit. Not through invention, but through trust. Not through instruction, but through repetition. It earned its place slowly, by never demanding too much, by adapting to circumstance, by offering calm without insistence. What began as a response to pain became a companion to quiet. What was once brewed in urgency was now prepared in patience. And in that slow transformation, chamomile found its most enduring role, not as something that fixes, but as something that accompanies. A gentle marker at the edge of the day, reminding the body that it is allowed to rest. In modern France, chamomile no longer arrives with urgency. It is not summoned by pain or necessity, nor does it announce itself as medicine. Instead, it appears quietly, almost invisibly, folded into the fabric of everyday life as a tisane, a word that itself carries centuries of accumulated meaning. What makes this modern presence remarkable is not how different it is from the past, but how much of the past still lingers within it. Beneath the simplicity of a cup of chamomile today lies an inheritance shaped by monks, midwives, peasants, nobles, regions, and rituals, all still guiding how the plant is brewed, served, and understood. In contemporary France, chamomile is rarely discussed in terms of cure, yet traditional wisdom remains embedded in practice. People still instinctively avoid boiling it aggressively. They still prefer gentle steeping. They still associate it with evening, calm digestion, and sleep. These habits are not learned from instruction manuals, but absorbed culturally, passed down through families, kitchens, and shared routines. The modern French tisane culture is built on restraint. Unlike caffeinated drinks or medicinal tonics, a tisane is not meant to push the body in any direction. It supports rather than stimulates. This philosophy echoes medieval and Renaissance understandings of balance, even if the language has changed. Chamomile, in particular, is chosen not because something is wrong, but because one wishes nothing to be wrong. It is preventive, preparatory, and permissive, allowing the body to ease into rest without force. Preparation methods today still reflect centuries-old distinctions. Water is heated, not boiled. Flowers are steeped, not cooked. Even in modern kitchens with electric kettles, many people wait a moment after boiling before pouring. an inherited gesture that mirrors monastic caution about heat. Steeping times are rarely rigidly measured, but guided by intuition, a little longer for digestion, a little shorter for relaxation. This intuitive adjustment is a direct descendant of older practices that emphasized attentiveness over precision. Modern packaging reinforces this continuity. Chamomile sold in loose form or sachets often emphasizes naturalness, gentleness, and tradition. The imagery used, fields, flowers, calm colors, echoes older associations of safety and familiarity. Even when chamomile is blended with other herbs, it is usually positioned as the soft base, the calming anchor. This mirrors its historical role as the herb that could be trusted across ages and conditions. In French households, chamomile tisane is still commonly offered rather than requested. A host might suggest it late in the evening. A parent might prepare it for a child who cannot sleep. An adult might reach for it after a heavy meal. These gestures reflect inherited social meanings. Offering chamomile signals care without intrusion. It does not diagnose or insist, it simply accompanies. Objects continue to shape the ritual. Cups are chosen deliberately, often smaller, lighter, and separate from those used for coffee or tea. This distinction matters. It preserves chamomile's identity as something apart from stimulation or productivity. Teapots and mugs used for tisanes tend to invite slowness. The act of holding warm ceramic in the hands echoes older rituals of pause. Whether consciously or not, the timing of chamomile consumption remains deeply traditional. It belongs to the evening. Rarely is it drunk hurriedly or between tasks. It marks a boundary. In a modern world filled with screens, schedules, and constant motion, this boundary has become even more meaningful. Chamomile functions as a gentle signal that the day is ending, much as it did centuries ago when artificial light was scarce and nights were long. Even language preserves the past. In French, chamomile tisane is often described as douce, apaisante légère. These are not clinical terms, they are experiential. They describe how something feels rather than what it does. This linguistic shift from effect to experience was centuries in the making, and it defines modern chamomile culture. Traditional wisdom also appears in what modern French chamomile culture avoids. There is little interest in making it stronger than necessary. Overconcentration is often seen as counterproductive. This echoes long-standing beliefs that chamomile works best when it is not forced. Its strength lies in consistency, not intensity. A cup every evening is valued more than a powerful brew taken rarely. Importantly, chamomile today still occupies a liminal space between food and care. It is not merely a drink, but it is not medicine either. This in-between status is precisely what allows it to persist across generations. It adapts without losing meaning. It can be modern without becoming unfamiliar. In pharmacies, grocery stores, and herbal shops, chamomile sits comfortably among both remedies and everyday items. This placement reflects its history. It has always belonged everywhere: fields, infirmaries, kitchens, salons. Modern France has simply inherited that versatility. What makes modern French chamomile culture distinctive is its quietness. There is no urgency to explain it, no need to justify it. People drink it because they always have, or because it feels right. This is the deepest mark of tradition, when knowledge no longer needs to be spoken to be practiced. When a modern French household prepares chamomile tisane, it is participating in an unbroken chain. The boiling pot has become a kettle. The earthen cup has become porcelain. The reasons have softened, but the core remains unchanged. Care is still expressed through warmth. Calm is still invited, not commanded. The body is still allowed to rest rather than pushed into it. Chamomile's journey, from Roman remedy to medieval manuscript, from midwife's pot to salon cup, culminates not in novelty, but in continuity. Modern tisane rituals are not reinventions. They are refinements of memory. Each cup carries traces of older hands that learned, slowly and patiently, how to let the plant do its quiet work. And so, in the present moment, chamomile continues exactly as it always has, not loudly, not forcefully, but faithfully. A simple infusion, shaped by centuries, still guiding the evening toward rest in the most French way possible with restraint, attention, and a deep respect for gentle things.